Hey guys, so I'm kind of switching gears here on the channel. As you know, there haven't been many videos because we were trying to do like production quality and all the things, and that's just not realistic in a busy household. So I'm just gonna start, if I have an idea for a video, I'm just gonna like hook up the camera and record and hope for the best. And hopefully that'll just get more videos out to help you guys, and it'll make things less stressful on this end too. So this is a totally impromptu video because there have been, just over the past weekend, today's Monday, so over the past weekend, there's been several threads going on the Memoria Press Facebook group about using rod and staff math, and a lot of people who are new to it, or even people who've tried using it but ran into some hiccups. So we've been using rod and staff since 2016, with the exception of 1 year when we went to an online math program, and then we came back to rod and staff. So I just want to give some tips and tricks for using this in the home setting and using it without feeling like what Mom said, that you have to have a degree in crafts and in making all the manipulatives and stuff like that. So I'm just going to cover rod and staff 1, 2, and 3, and kind of go through the teacher's guide and just say, okay, here's what they recommend, but here's what we did instead, and it just made life a lot easier. So for rod and staff 1, which if you're using Memoria Press, the first half of that is used in kindergarten and the second half is used in first grade. For the number pattern cards, when you go to do the lessons, you're only introducing a couple of those at a time. And so we found it was just a lot easier to, I would put the dots on a whiteboard. This is a Dollar Tree whiteboard, or a piece of paper inside a sleeve protector, or just a random piece of paper. I would just write the dot patterns on that, and we would go over what they were. We'd do that for reviews and stuff too. And then they're getting a ton of practice with those number patterns in the daily work. So really, for most kids, that is going to be totally sufficient. If you have a child who really needs over-teaching and really needs to practice those a lot, it would definitely be worth it to get the grade 1 flashcards from Rod and Staff, which Memoria does sell. You just have to do some searching on their website to find them. So I'll link them down below in case you do want to go that route. For the before number, after number, what number comes between, those types of cards, all we did was we used the hundreds board. And you can call out, okay, 24, 28, 26. And they would tell me them in order. You can also do that with a number line. There is a printable number line in the teacher manual on page 598, and it's meant to be desk size. So you can copy it or use the scanner app on your phone and take a scan of it and print it, and they can use that for their between numbers and stuff like that as well. For the number order and more or less, another thing we would do is I would say 3 numbers, and this is a little more advanced, so you'd want to go this route first until they're more solid in the concept. I would just say 3 numbers that they had learned, and then they would write them down in order on the board. And it was just a quick review so that we do a couple of sets of those so that I knew that that concept was still going strong for them. And we do the same with more and less. Start out with the hundreds board or the number line, and then move to, I would say, okay, write down 5 and 7. Okay, circle the one that's more. And we would do something like that. Let's see here. I'm going through the teaching aids section to make sure I hit on stuff. The flannel board. The point of the flannel board is to just make the concepts of addition and subtraction concrete, which for young kids, they really need that. I've done this a whole bunch of different ways. I have gotten some felt, probably got it from Hobby Lobby, and I glued it into this inside flap of a binder, and we just used that as our flannel board, and I had cut out the little squares and whatever. And then over time, I just started using, we've used beads, we've used rocks, we've used Legos. Just pick an object that your kid loves to collect or find, and use that. And you'll be presenting the exact same concept, still a lot of interest, they're still able to move the pieces, but you will not have had to cut out felt squares for 30 minutes. One thing I will say, if you choose to use something like Legos or beads, make sure that they're all the same size and color. Rocks, they're all close enough that you don't have to worry about it as much. But you want to keep them all the same color so that kids are really able to focus on, oh, 2 of these plus 1 of these equals 3 of these. If you start mixing colors, that can get things a little mixed up in their brain as they learn those concepts. So same color, same general size. If you're using Legos, definitely. We love the little 4 squares for Legos. We use those a ton for counters and all different things. For the place value chart, I really do like how they do the place value in book 1 using the crayons. Again, getting that concrete to abstract. But to make the actual chart, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is the one that we did for 2nd grade, because at that point they don't use the pictures up top anymore. This is actually one of our little cubicle boards that we use for cutting out distractions. And I just put it on the back of one of those. And we found out that you can use chalk on these and erase it, which has been super helpful. So at the kindergarten, 1st grade level, you could make copies of those crayon images that they have in the back of book 1. And just stick them up here with some tape so that you can remove them for next year. And then you can, instead of having to make all of your numeral cards, numbers 0 through 9, you just use chalk and write the numbers that need to go there. The kids can write them as a review, and then they get to erase it and move on. So this has just been a lot more flexible, and all you need is a piece of cardboard. For the 2nd grade, jumping ahead just a little, in 2nd grade they give you patterns for the actual number blocks, and again, you can use the same board. You're just and what we do is we put the number blocks in here to form the numbers that we're trying to make, and then she goes in and writes with her chalk, writes them in numeral form as well. So you can cover a lot with just this one thing, and it took like no time at all to create. For things like money, clock, liquid measures, really use the real thing. If you've got one in your house, maybe you have a clock that doesn't have a battery anymore, use that and have them, adjust the hands on the clock, use real money, pull out measuring cups to show the liquid measures. You don't have to do the posters and stuff like that. I kept a couple of, I kept a quart jar and a 2-quart pint canning jar and stuff like that. I kept those on the table for a few days so that they could visually see those differences while they were working on their workbook. I think that covers, one more thing. In grade 1, they do introduce skip counting, and what they recommend doing is having a large number line that you hang on your wall, and they have these patterns for these little triangles and circles that you can mark, kind of hang up there to mark the skip counting and stuff like that. What I do instead, that was just too much for me. We take out the 100 chart, and I'll say, okay, we're going to count by 2s. And so I'm like, all right, so 1, 2, and they'll circle that. 3, 4, and they'll circle that. And we'll work through that until, whatever number we're going up to, maybe it's 20. And then we'll go back and just say the ones we circled. And that will get you skip counting all the way up to 100 as that builds over first and second grade. And yeah, that's worked out really well for us. Okay, so I think we can move on to second grade. Oh, and the other thing, do not worry about when they talk in the book about like the hand signals and having individual flashcards for the kids. You don't need those in a homeschool setting. You're sitting right there, you're talking to them, you're not trying to keep attention of an entire classroom. And the individual flashcards, the flashcard use that you have is usually for that child, maybe one or two other kids. So I found that the individual cards just really aren't needed. In second grade, you really get into more of the feeling like you have to make a lot of crafts, but you don't. So again, the place value chart, that was made for book 1. You can just carry that into book 2, and you can either keep those crayon pictures up at the top, or you can remove those and just write the words, thousands, hundreds, etc. Money and clock, those stay the same. We have never used the 1,000 book that they talk about. They use it for skip counting. Again, we just stuck with the 100 board and it worked great. The posters, okay. So you have your boat poster, which is supposed to get in the concept of you have a whole number and then these two numbers make up that whole number. So maybe your whole number is 2 and you have one dark boat and one light boat, and put together you have 2 boats. So we've done that a couple of ways. When the kids needed something a little more interactive, I literally just came to the board, and if we were working with the 5 family, I would draw 5 boats up here across, and then we would go through and just shade the ones we needed. Then we'd erase inside when we were done with that problem and go on. And then they were able to say, okay, 5 is our whole number. And then based on the shading, they would write down what the parts were. And we would just work through it that way. And it was a good interactive, hands-on thing for when they just needed that extra interactivity. Other than that, what I did was I just used the workbook. In the lesson pages, they show you, your dark boats and your light boats and what that equals. And we just worked right off of those diagrams instead of making the boat posters. I did make all these posters at one point, and I found that we just didn't use them. And it was far easier to just use the diagrams that are already in the book. We also did the same for the Clover Patch. Just use the diagram in the book. And honestly, that was less confusing than trying to set up and flip the little Clover Patch pieces. So Clover Patch is basically the same concept as those boats. You have your whole number, and then you have a part that has bees and a part that doesn't. And it's for working with larger numbers, but it got cumbersome, and just using the charts that are already on their workbook pages worked great. And they can even, as you do it, they can even color those in if they want to, again, have an extra level of interactivity there. And by the way, I need to clarify, the reason I'm not showing examples of like these diagrams I'm talking about in the books is because most of you probably know Rod and Staff is a Mennonite publishing company, and they really prefer that their books are not online. Like, they would prefer they weren't even sold online. So that's why, like, I know Rainbow Resource, they don't even show their books on their website. Like, you have to call to order their books. They may have changed that recently, but I know for a long time you couldn't even order Rod and Staff just through the website. You had to call and order them over the phone. It's why Memoria doesn't show samples inside the books. It's kind of compromised. They'll show the cover, but not the inside of the actual books. So it's just out of respect for the publisher's beliefs regarding technology. So I'm trying to preserve that here by not showing the insides. So I hope that explains why this setup is the way it is. For the Blossom charts or the Blossom posters. Memoria actually sells these ready-made, so if you want to use them, they have them ready-made. You can buy them and be done. They're not necessary for the lessons, but I found they're really helpful for independent review. Like I could send one of my kids with their charts and a couple of packs of bees that went with those specific charts and say, okay, you know, put your bees on the proper charts. And it was a nice independent work that they could do. But for actual like lessons, if you want to refer to the charts, or if you're chanting the number families called the triplets that those charts are meant to portray, you can turn to page 15 in the teacher's manual for book 2, and then I think it's page 10 in the teacher's manual for grade 3, because it reviews the Blossom charts. And they have all the charts there with all the triplets that go with each chart right there. And we just worked off of those when we wanted to chant our triplets and have a nice visual to go with that. So that's another workaround for that. Let's see here. I think that was it. Because that was the other thing. In grade 3, this is really the last grade that you have a lot of teaching aids involved. And what I did was I turned to page 9, 10, 11 in the front of the teacher book. And there it gives you all 20 triplets in a row listed. And I'm going to go ahead and show this because I actually made a copy of it. Again, I just used my scanner app and then enlarged it and then printed it out. So I was able to do this. And then we would just go through and recite off of that. And let's see, they have a repeat of the Blossom charts in there. And then they have some nice visual posters for addition terms, subtraction terms. If I found that some of my kids didn't need those at all, others who did, we just looked at the chart, the posters, the example posters right in the book, and we worked off of those, and that worked out just fine. The one thing that I did majorly differently with 3rd grade, they use it's basically a multiplication array. Thank you. I think it was my friend Michelle who finally got the word that we were all looking for to figure out how to explain this chart. It's a multiplication array. And basically they use the concept of sea creatures being groups of sea creatures being taken by waves to convey the concept of multiplication is you're working with groups. I found it very unintuitive, and so to present multiplication, I did it this way. Let me think. I used a different color chalk at the time, but for simplicity's sake for this video, I'm just going to use white. So when I was teaching it to my daughter, I explained to her that when we have a problem like 3 times 1, what we're actually saying is that we have 3 groups of, this symbol means of, 3 groups of one thing in each group is 3 things. I hope that didn't go out of the video. So 3 groups with one thing in each group, we end up with 3 things. And we just worked through this in a couple of different ways. I drew pictures up here. I had 3 groups. I had one thing in each group. So she was able to see it concretely. Then she was able to see it as a sentence. And then when I originally presented it, I actually had this down here. And then I translated the sentence into mathematical notation so that she was able to see how it all related and worked together. And honestly, it was the best multiplication lesson I've ever had. And she's child number 6. So it just worked really well. We'll call that good. So I am not a mathematician, and there are other moms who know rod and staff in and out 20 million times more than I do. But these are things that have helped us. They're not end all be all. There are a million different ways to do this. If you do want to create, if you just really have that creative urge and you want to create the different charts and manipulatives, there is an awesome thread on the Memoria Press forum where moms have shared ways that they've made it work for them when creating those charts, and just lots of great tips in there. So I'm going to go ahead and link that in the description, that thread in the description box below. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, I wasn't sure if I was going to cover this or not, but when you're teaching the actual lesson, keep in mind that Rod and Staff follows a review. How do I want to put this? It's a review, new concept, preparation. So at the beginning, you are reviewing past concepts. Then you're learning the new concept. It's usually under the heading class time. And then you're actually laying the groundwork for future concepts that are going to be appearing soon. That's usually in a section called follow-up, which is kind of a weird name. They call it that because it's meant to be in a classroom setting done at a different part of the day. I think of it more as preparation because you're preparing for later concepts. Sometimes follow-up is actually just more review. So you kind of have to gauge, what your child needs that day. But if there's something in there that you haven't seen before, use the follow-up section because you can almost guarantee that it's going to show up later. And Rod and Staff is very incremental. So little things and little ways that they word things. A friend was just saying the other day, she would wonder why they had worded something one way in, one lesson, and then 10 lessons down the road, she's like, oh, that's why they word it that way, because it helps them make sense of this. So just another thing to be aware of as you use it. But I don't do like the little scripts that are like, that kind of give a story behind what we're about to do. So like when introducing or when working with the blossom charts, they'll have a little story about, the bees like to go to the clover and gather nectar, and this is part of, God's design for them to do these things. For my kids, that would just be, I think the reason they include them is to kind of give a sense of interactivity to the class and relate it to their real lives, because again, this was written for children living in Mennonite culture, so they're very tied into nature and the harvest cycle and things like that. But for my kids, it would have just been kind of distracting. It would have gotten them off on a tangent instead of being able to focus on the concept. So we don't go into those, but I do, generally speaking, and depending on the child I'm working with, I'll just go through and, we will, okay, 1 quarter is worth, we count quarters by, and things like that. And then we definitely do the story problems mentally that they have in there. A lot of really good mental math practice is in the teacher books. And a lot of people miss that because they think that the workbooks is where everything is, and it totally isn't. You really want to use the teacher manual. Otherwise, Rod and Staff can get really dry really fast because you'll be missing really the core of the program. So I hope that helped. And if you have any questions, definitely drop them in the comments, and either on this video or if you're seeing this on Facebook or something, feel free to post in the comments there, and I'll answer what I can, and hopefully get some friends to chime in if there's something I can't answer, because like I said, this has just been our experience with it, but I hope it helps. So take care.